Welcome to another Candid Conversations podcast. I'm absolutely delighted, thrilled to have one of our supporters, a gentleman who is very big in the world of equality, diversity and inclusion. Somebody who has that in his title. He's a Director of Diversity and Inclusion at the University of Wolverhampton, a very close friend of ours at the Multicultural Apprenticeship and Skills Alliance, a gentleman that we talk about quite often, somebody who is an influencer in our world. Adam, thank you so much. It's Adam Vasco. Thank you so much for coming today. Much appreciate your time today and your support throughout, particularly last year. Your name has come into conversations many times. I know my colleague Jagdeep is a massive fan, and we often talk about some of the work that you're doing and some of the impact and the fact that you've been a massive ally and supporter of our work. So thank you for that as a starting point.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, and likewise, huge fans of the work that Jag and you all do, and delighted to be here. I'm really pleased to be here. So thank you so much for having me.
So Adam, you've got a massive responsibility because you have diversity and inclusion in your job title. So firstly, how does that and how does that feel? Because that's a bit of a burden on your good self in a way.
Yeah, it's obviously it's a huge area, and I suppose I always counter these things by saying in the future, the ideal is that jobs like mine don't exist. You know, they should be embedded and part of everyone's job. And of course, in universities and at the University of Wolverhampton, everyone is committed to that work. However, we are at a stage, I think, as a society where we know that we do need to do more to start to level the playing field and ensure equitable experiences. So it is a huge job. There is no question about that. My role almost looks at sort of three parts, really. So obviously, students, it would be ridiculous being in university with students weren't the number one thing that is a huge responsibility. Closing of awarding gaps, of making sure equitable experiences, ensuring that our students leave with great outcomes and go on to great careers and contribute, which they do. Also, there's a staff element of making sure that we are an equitable employer, that we are practicing what we preach. And then also a third part is working with professional practice partners and with externally as well, and ensuring that, we are part of the community that we serve. And I think that's quite a key terminology there. That's the idea of serving the community at universities, civic universities like ours. That's what we should be doing. So you're right, huge job, but it would be completely remiss of me to pretend that it's something that I just do on my own. Everyone is committed to that work, and it's just steering and giving some guidance to some of that work as well.
Thank you. So Adam, I've obviously mentioned your job title, but it's not the job title because you've got the experience, you've got the cultural perspective, you've got the lived experience, and you've got the background. So I want to talk a little bit about that in terms of your specific, unique perspectives that's got you here, really. So, I mentioned to you before recording the fact that I love your LinkedIn, particularly the introduction, the bio, very unique. I read a lot of LinkedIn bios and as part of work and just generally when you're recruiting. But this bio really, to be frank with you, I thought it's very unique, very memorable. And when you're talking about your dual Nigerian and Scouse heritage and some of that, it's a bit of a differentiator.
Yes.
So talk to us a little bit about your background and your experiences.
So I, as I've mentioned in that bio, so I'm from Liverpool, but my heritage is Nigerian and Scouse. I can't sort of say it any differently from that. I suppose my grandfather was from Lagos in Nigeria. He came to the UK. He originally came to Liverpool, actually to Birkenhead, which is just over the water from Liverpool in 1933. He came for what was the world's biggest scout jamboree, and liked what he saw. And when he came to contribute to the war efforts, he came to build ships at Camel Laird's shipping yard at Birkenhead. And he started a family there, of which my dad was the eldest of 9 siblings, and created a life in Liverpool. And I'm really, really proud of both sort of sides of that heritage. It's, we're not just two things, obviously, but I'm incredibly proud to be from Liverpool and the region. I've got a huge affinity to. I love regional accents, dialects, and all the things that make places, which is why I've adopted and loved the West Midlands so much, because of all the nuances there as well, which is great. And of course, this Nigerian heritage is something that I'm really proud of. And I was really fortunate when I was younger that we spent quite a lot of time. It was important to my dad that we spent lots of time going back to Nigeria and sort of connecting with that, which I did really successfully up to a period. And then there was a slight change, and I lost a slight part of my identity as time went on, which is partly why I'm so committed to this work in my adult life, I suppose.
Okay. And the other thing that really my eyes sort of went straight to is your academic sort of history and background. There's a number of qualifications, particularly in terms of education. So, you've got a master's in education, inclusive education, and doctorate in education, with a focus of sort of cultural aspect of it. So that's a unique perspective. So talk to us a little bit about the educational journey, the academic. It's
an interesting one, and I've got to be really honest about this. So when I was in a sort of previous life almost, that there was a point in time in my late teens where I'd always wanted to be a teacher, always wanted to be a primary school teacher, because my primary school experience was absolutely brilliant. Secondary school experience was absolutely horrendous. Talk about that another time perhaps. But primary school was tremendous, absolutely loved it. And that's really, it inspired me to want to be a teacher. At some point slightly later on in my teenage years, I was slightly distracted by music and different things, and DJing and all different things around there. And I deviated slightly away from qualifications for a short amount of time. I eventually returned into education. I suppose I would have been classed as a mature student, but I was really only just in my early 20s. But what was great is I started, because I've been away from education just for a few years, but I felt like a degree was going to be a bit of a jump. And I did an access into teaching course, but it was focused specifically on getting what we would refer to as global majority or ethnic minority, however we want to look at that. People into teaching, and as part of that access course then there was a Black History unit attached to it, and I have to say that was in my probably being 21 years old, the first time of engaging and understanding Black history, and that really gave a catalyst then for a love of learning, which has continued. So yes, graduated with my degree and qualified teacher status. I've had a career in that environment and absolutely loved that time. But then I've since moved into higher education. But as part of that journey, and part of the desire really to move into higher education, was continuing the learning journey. So the Masters in Inclusive Education has been great, and then a professional doctorate. We've really been able to focus on developing cultural competence or cultural humility. Has been brilliant. I'm really, really fortunate that the things that I'm interested in, the things I'm passionate about, I'm able to study about, I'm able to learn and work towards as well. And it really is a privileged position to be able to bring all those things together.
Thank you, Adam. You've mentioned obviously students being at the heart of the education institution, University of Wolverhampton. It's a fairly large institution, over 21,000 students, according to the last information that I have. But it's set obviously in the West Midlands in terms of infrastructure and so forth. So talk to us a little bit about the University of Wolverhampton, its sort of dynamics, the shape and size of it. What potentially differentiates it. A little bit maybe about the history of the institution, and anything you want to share with ourselves. Really.
Yeah. So it's a really proud institution. It's a great place to be, I have to say. So obviously the initial sort of history with it being the Wolverhampton Institute of Engineering, going back quite a long time, and then moving through into obviously being a polytechnic and then into a modern university as well. I think I mentioned before the commitment to being a civic university is absolutely integral to that. One of our sort of strapline, if you like, is the University of Opportunity. That genuinely really rings true in all that we do. We continue to rise through the rankings in terms of social mobility, and it's not something that we just shout about and say that we're really proud of because it's something that we do really well. It really is our reason for being, really. For the region itself, for us as a university, for the community, we are hugely proud of the fact of the number of first generation students that come to us, the first in generation of students who come to us. Really proud of the contribution that they make, both nationally, regionally, internationally. And I think that for most of us who've chosen to work in sort of that post 92 modern universities, that's what it's all about, really. That's what gets you out of bed in the morning of really adding value. Our Vice Chancellor recently talked about whether we should be about the University of Opportunity, but whether we should be the University of Opportunity and Employability, because I think that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about changing people's lives, potentially for the better, and by them realising how brilliant they are, and having a role in that and facilitating that is absolutely great. The university, it's a challenging sector at the moment. There's absolutely no doubt about that. But we are. What separates us, I think, is that we. Lots of people talk about students being at the heart, but genuinely they are central and integral to all that we do. I think in terms of inclusion and inclusive practice, we are leading the way in lots of different ways. That's not to say, by the way, that we don't have challenges. It would be completely wrong to pretend that isn't the case. But I feel incredibly humbled, really, to work for the university, and I was new to the region, and seeing the enthusiasm that the people, the community, the staff, the students that they have, it's great to be part of.
Adam, as you said, the university is fairly well known for its social mobility. I'm going to read something from here. It says the university is listed in the top 10 universities for social mobility in a paper published by the Higher Education Policy Institute with the world-class research, and 80% graduates, which find employment, employability. So the two things in terms of social mobility and then the employability aspect of it, ring very true there. So that's a differentiator in itself.
Yes, absolutely, and I think it's not by accident. It is by design. So yes, of course, there are some geographical issues that come along with that in terms of, yes, we are in a region where we are widening participation, but actually the work that's going on to be inclusive and in terms of embedding employability throughout the curriculum, etc., is absolutely key. You mentioned about research there. It's bringing all those things together, and so we continue. I think last year we were 5th in the country in terms of social mobility index, and that this year 3rd. The Vice Chancellor is very clear on the direction of travel that we want to go. We're ambitious in terms of ensuring that we continue to not just move through the ranks in terms of social mobility, but by every metric as well. So it's an exciting time to be at the university. As I say, whilst they're not recognising that there are challenges within the sector as well. Yeah,
another area that's what I want to touch on. It's quite well known to work with businesses.
Yeah.
So a fair amount of enterprise activity takes place. So, you've got a Midland Centre for Cybersecurity.
Yeah.
There's a lot of work in terms of the Science Park as well. in terms of that support and support in terms of innovation and growth and so forth. So it's got another area which is fairly well known for. So if you think about University of Wolverhampton, you would think innovation, you would think science, you would think business as well, enterprise, all those areas as well, which again is.
Yeah, as I say, it's the history around, as you say, they're being known for those areas is absolutely great, and I think in terms of things have been really forward thinking, like the cyber hub and the cyber security and those things. It has been excellent, really forward thinking, and we continue on that journey. There is a medical school in the pipeline as we look to diversify the offer that we have, again to contribute to the region. And beyond. So, yes, that we are in a position of growth. The university continues to grow.
You're talking about growth is adding other areas. So in terms of specialist construction, built environments, and so forth. So there's other areas that is sort of building on as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're absolutely blessed in we've had a number of new campuses. There's the Springfield campus, and then there's the National Brownfield Institute, which sits within that campus. And you talk about the built environment and the sort of the levelling up agenda, and that building in itself being built on an old brewery and using brownfields. It's a state-of-the-art facility, but again, it's not just about what that brings to us in our community. It's about what we can contribute to the wider community in terms of building on brownfields rather than the green belt. And I think you're right to highlight this diverse portfolio that we offer, but things that we do and do incredibly well.
So Adam, you've been with the organisation, with the institution for say 2.5 years now, and so talk to us a little bit about that journey in terms of the impact and the initiatives that you've been currently working on.
So it's been great. So I sit within a team of people. So we have my colleague Dr. Ada Adegi, who's the Associate Dean for Inclusivity. We work really, really closely together. It's a pleasure working with Ada, and Sukhvinder Singh, who is another EDI specialist, but he's an associate director who works within HR, so looks at staff. And we've been on a huge journey. So as I arrived, you know what it's like, because you arrive to a new place and you're sort of thinking, right, I'll look at the landscape, and I arrived to find a brilliant inclusive framework that Ada and the team had already rolled out. So a really forward-thinking curriculum framework, which was there, that had 4 core principles about curriculum design and inclusive curriculum design. That work has been taken on board by Universities UK. There were case studies around that type of work. But we're actually at a point where we're moving on from that now. We've got another curriculum framework where we've embedded inclusivity into that. There's a lot of work around access and participation, so our APP, closing of gaps. So we've done a lot of good work in ensuring that our continuation and retention is really secure. So we have more students than ever who are continuing and going on into good jobs and having good graduate outcomes. And we're really proud about that. Again, I always counter this of that I don't want to sit here and just give a completely rosy picture and pretend that everything's perfect and pat ourselves on the back. As I've done that, and more students continue and attain a degree and go on to graduate outcomes. What we do notice is that we still have a awarding gap, so an ethnicity degree awarding gap between different groups, and that is a key area of focus for us at the moment. But in terms of other things that we've achieved, we've done quite a lot of work with lots of our practice partners. So some really interesting work with the NHS and NHS England around how their document combating racial discrimination for nursing midwives and nursing associates plays out in higher education institutes, and we've been really proud of that work that we've got going on. we've got all types of things. We've got some staff who've been really successful in closing those awarding gaps, and they're actually developing an app at the moment as a piece of knowledge exchange, which will go out. And then in terms of staff, and speaking about Sukhvinder's work, a really good analysis of things in terms of our gender pay gaps and our ethnicity pay gaps, and looking at how we can address that. Some really interesting initiatives like the reverse mentoring program, which is absolutely brilliant. So the idea of reverse mentoring, the idea of being that either staff from minoritized groups and sometimes junior staff mentoring senior colleagues so they can understand the lived experience, all being really, really successful and having a huge impact. So lots of work to do, but lots of progress has been made. Absolutely.
I mean, I mentioned your LinkedIn bio, which was very interesting to read, but I'll tell you what was slightly more interesting, if you don't mind me saying, was your work that you did for the Black History Month.
Yes.
The personal journey in an article that you shared, which was reclaiming my narrative.
Yes.
And I thought that was just brilliant. So share that with us if you can, please. In terms of
okay. Yeah. So the sort of reclaiming my own narrative piece is I mentioned a little earlier that my own journey of self-acceptance and everything else is a really interesting one. So my early childhood being great, I really had a strong sense of identity. I don't know what that identity was. I just had a strong sense of self. However, moving to a different secondary school and moving into a slightly different region, so where we moved to, my dad was the first Black person to move to that area, and I suppose what transpired after that was a really interesting period of time. It felt like it's such a long period of time, and it had such a seismic impact. But really, obviously, it's only your secondary school years. But that set in motion really a period of time where, as someone who's mixed or dual heritage, I was in a school all of a sudden where I was one of 3 children who weren't white in the entire school, and that not that always would mean that there was going to be some bullying, by the way, but in my school at that time, that was the what happened from there. And I suppose I had a choice, really, as someone who's mixed or dual heritage, to sort of really push back or to assimilate a little bit more. And sort of to my shame in adulthood, I chose to assimilate, and it's taken years, really, of unpicking that afterwards to begin to understand the journey of that. And I think what's been really, really interesting, there are real moments and things that, so as we talked about that power of education and my own journey in education, studying both the masters and then going into the professional doctorate, and doing all the reading and the literature reviews that come around that, just helped me come to face more and more with my own internalized racism, which is, I'm now confident saying that. It's really uncomfortable, but I'm confident of saying that I had internalized and still come face to face with internalized racism, which is really strange when you're part of the community. And as I said, my dad's one of 9, so I've got a massive family. So multiculturalism in my family is just the norm. So coming face to face with this idea that you've internalized racism has been strange, and I try and speak on it now because I feel that it's an empowering place to be. I think it's also showing your own vulnerability is important in this work, and I think that often, we talk about things like fragility as people talk around issues to do with maybe race or other things. So I think that by showing and demonstrating that even those of us who are part of the community can internalize things, whether it's racism, ableism, sexism, whatever those things are. In my instance, racism can be powerful. and also I'm a big advocate of Black History Month, and I know other people aren't, and I understand those reasons why not. But for me, it is a chance to amplify, and as I said, again, going back to that access course that I did initially, learning Black history for the first time was, again, another pivotal moment of sort of sliding doors moment of well, I wouldn't be sat here today talking to you if it wasn't for those things and coming face to face with that.
Yeah. I mean, I found this article to be fairly easy to read, which is a big thing because sometimes they can be quite heavyweight. I thought it was very impactful, thoughtful. I did actually feel that you were very open. You're sharing your vulnerabilities, as you said, and it's a very, very unique read. And I thought to myself, wow, that's exactly what I thought. Wow, this is very interesting. You know what, I must meet this fellow. So if you haven't read this article, I would suggest just Google Adam Vasco Reclaiming My Narrative. Fantastic, really easy to read article, and it's got a note here about again how you're adapting this image, which is on this article, on all your keynotes and all your presentations. So fantastic.
Yeah. So the image is I spent a little bit of time on Photoshop. So yes, slight copyright infringements, but there is an image of Will Smith as the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, and I've taken his head and superimposed my face onto his. And the reason why I do that is I often start when it comes to keynotes saying that I'm going to tell them a story and tell them that I'm going to tell them a story all about how my life got turned upside down. And yeah, it's a story of my childhood and that change, and the end of that being that the choice to assimilate and the years that follow on from there, and really speaking to this idea that I really think we do need to push back on the idea that all people need to assimilate. I really challenge that notion of assimilation. We shouldn't lose our sense of self, and I think that's absolutely key and really, really important. And so, yeah, often when I'm talking, then it tends to be how I start the conversation. So, yeah,
there were many new things for me here. Again, assimilation you're talking about in terms of you've mentioned internal racism, the fact that you sort of owned it as well. You mentioned the word shame as well here, and you mentioned it again. So you're very open about this.
So I think I need to really shout out the. The reason why I've got more comfortable in that, so it's been a very long journey, but just in the last few years, Nova Reid wrote a book called The Good Ally, and I guess the book really is probably aimed really at white people understanding how to become a better ally, really. However, when I read the book and I was really struck by this guided journey that sort of Nova took me on, and it's helped me to be able to better articulate those things, that internalized racism, and recognizing where it creeps up actually, and it does creep up, and I think those things can in all of us. So yeah, but as I say, I've been blessed by the fact that my areas of research and my own studies have meant that I've spent a lot of time engaging with the literature, and that has been what helps me to find my voice. And I much prefer writing in that informal sort of blog tone. I know that I really understand and preach to the importance of research, etc., but I'd much rather write a blog than write a journal article.
I think it's very approachable for people like myself who would just read it very quickly, but the message is very clear and it's very understood, and it hits a mark. So as I said, I would recommend anybody just to Google that, Adam Vasco Reclaiming My Narrative. A fantastic blog, fantastic article. Adam, you've just completed your doctoral research in cultural competence in education. So talk to us a little bit about the subject matter and about the journey that you've had.
Okay. So I suppose that having a broad role in EDI, so I've talked a lot around issues to do with race, and that's partly because of my own lived experience, obviously, but then working across the full spectrum when it comes to EDI and inclusion, and of course the key word in inclusion is inclusive, and therefore then everyone being included. So I wanted to conduct some research that really thought and some work that really thought about that included everyone, so people didn't feel that they were on the outside of something. And I started to realise that my job was not necessarily to go in to have a debate with someone about their world viewpoint. So my job often is around ensuring that whatever personal beliefs and worldviews and all of those things that we all have don't impact on the decision making, or don't impact negatively on the decision making when it comes to inclusion, etc. So my vehicle into this was around cultural competency. I'd been doing some work with the NHS, and I'd come across Terry Cross's work on cultural competency in terms of the NHS, which was really, really interesting. He had a continuum. I liked that idea of education being my background. There were new ideas in education, so I built on some of that. Also linked into Dr. Milton Bennett's work as well. And I suppose the key for me was about this work that no longer was I necessarily going in and so I've got some really great colleagues who are radical, and I'd like to think that I have radical candor as well, but my own experience has been that walking into a group of people, whether it's working with a practice partner or working with schools, or and using really challenging language and sort of using challenging language, and often the challenge is needed, but that isn't the best way to get people to come along with you on this journey. So cultural competency for me, and the journey towards cultural humility, facilitates some conversation really of us recognizing the importance of centering diverse voices and perspectives, understanding that we see the world through our lens, and that it's actually really important to listen to other people as well and begin to understand their views, that this work will never be done. There is no end point to cultural competence or anything else. And in fact, really, the art of showing cultural humility really is the key word there is humility, and stepping back and accepting we don't know, and that's okay, but we're open to listening to learn. And so as part of the work, we've developed a continuum which helps as a framework for institutions, businesses, different places to guide them through their journey. And I created this continuum, which again was built on the work that Terry Cross had done and Dr. Milton Bennett, etc. But the key bit about the work really, and the power of the work that I've done, is that although it is populated with things and common phrases that you might hear, and it gives some ideas of each stage of the continuum, actually the power of the continuum is sat down with individuals and starting to say, well, what does cultural naivety maybe look like in your institution? Where have you seen examples of this? And actually, what's this idea of cultural humility? What are you aiming for as an institution, as an organisation, as a group of people, as an individual even? And so I've really enjoyed going on that journey, and I felt that it was a piece of work that meant that, because the idea of culture, when we talk about it, by the way, is everyone's unique lived experience, and that doesn't preclude anyone at all. It's really important to say that. So yeah, I found that it was a broad and inclusive piece. They're not without, again, its criticisms, because when you do something so broadly, there is a chance that you you miss out on some of the depth that's, you do need to be able to label and challenge things. So I get pushback at times of saying, well, it's important that, if we're looking at issues of race, or if we're looking at issues of sexism, that we really unpick that misogyny which is contributing to that patriarchal system, etc. And I agree, I don't disagree at all, but we also have to be, I used to say pragmatic, but actually a colleague of mine, Barnaby Rain, who's a brilliant academic, has challenged me to say be strategic. We've got to be strategic about this. So my time is limited. So if I'm working with, say, a practice partner, going into work with a school, etc., what impact am I trying to have? And the impact that I'm trying to have is trying to improve things in terms of inclusion, etc., and going in and challenging and really picking at specific parts of language isn't always going to really be helpful. So cultural competency, I think, is a good framework and a vehicle to have those conversations, which leads to impact, which does lead to the same goals. We are all headed towards those same goals, but I think, whether it's being radically pragmatic or it's just being strategic, which is probably a better word, I think they are the things.
This is a very unique perspective in terms of the language. The words matter. Do words matter?
Yes.
Ultimately, it's about making a difference, a meaningful difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the fact that you've had a debate and conversation about the word pragmatic and strategic, and maybe strategic is the right word because it's about making that difference, isn't it? Really, ultimately. So I think that's a learning for me today. The massive takeaway. One of the things I wanted to get you to share with us is one of your previous sort of projects, Everyday Heroes. I thought that was very interesting in terms of, you talked about reverse mentoring and mentoring, and particularly getting sort of the younger people to sort of talk about their heritage and their background. So just talk to us about that.
Yeah, so I've always, whichever job or role that I've had, I've always tried to still maintain close contact with the most important people in my field, which is either the pupils, students, or children, whichever age that you're talking about. And so Everyday Heroes was about working. This was when I was at Liverpool John Moores, so I was working with groups of secondary and FE age, so sixth form age, young people. And about bringing them to things, and you're really right to make the link to reverse mentoring. One of my sort of pet peeves as such is that when we are thinking about either developing, let's say, global majority leaders or women's empowerment programs, that the focus is always on the individuals, so that group. And it's not that group that need to change. It's the structures and the systems that need to change. The work needs to be done by the institutions. And so both with reverse mentoring and Everyday Heroes, the idea is that the institutions sit and listen. So with reverse mentoring, the senior member of staff is being mentored by someone else. As a junior member of staff, bringing their lived experience. When it comes to Everyday Heroes, we wanted those young people to come and tell their stories, their experiences, to say all the wonderful things that they could offer, and also to explain what some of those barriers are and why you may not see the representation that the university desired. So, John Moores, again, another brilliant civic university and institution, wanted to diversify, particularly its education department. There's an issue within the city of Liverpool in terms of the number of diverse teachers, which is slightly ironic given that I joined an access course a very long time ago that was still looking at trying to address that issue. And actually, it's about empowering and listening to those young people, and listening to. We talk about co-creation. It's almost like a buzzword in education at the moment. But true, authentic co-creation starts by centering the people who we are co-creating with. And so Everyday Heroes, I worked with a colleague of mine, Dr. Graham Downs, and it was magical. It was magical because we just let the young people get on with it. We did not we very, 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 it was truly co-created. We very loosely steered sometimes, and what the young people produced was brilliant, and it had a sizable and change effect on the institution, but also on the young people as well. I continue to see some of those. They're still young people, although they're in their 20s or etc. But still see some of them now, and they talk about the impact that's had, and they've gone on to university, and that was the idea. If they wanted to, because university, by the way, isn't for everyone. That's absolutely fine, but it should be an option for everyone if they want to pursue that.
Okay, Adam, one of the interviews I've just read and listened to, you were talking about how, again, at your previous institution, Liverpool John Moores University, where you were a lecturer amongst many other things, you talked about how the university was struggling to recruit teaching staff.
Yeah.
And you gave a perspective on that. So do you want to share with us in terms of why it might be a struggle in terms of appealing to people from ethnic diverse sort of backgrounds and some of the challenges?
There were sort of two almost avenues to this, really. So in teaching itself, there is nationally there is a huge underrepresentation of diverse teachers within education, and I think that we can all accept that what we were looking for as a bare minimum is that our workforces represent the sort of the census data, the communities we are part of. That's got to be a good thing. It doesn't mean that we need to go over to another way, but it should be. It's important that the young people, you have to see it to be it, that type of thing. So, and despite in lots of areas which have regional diversity, there is an underrepresentation. Interestingly, there isn't an underrepresentation of applicants. The data shows us that there are actually an overrepresentation of applicants. So something is happening at that stage, which means which needs unpicking. That in itself needs unpicking. We're just in the process. We are waiting to hear from a bid that we've put in, which is the two universities that I've mentioned and worked for coming together. So the University of Wolverhampton and John Moores University, because at Wolverhampton we have a really diverse group of trainee teachers, student teachers. So around about 42% of our student population in teaching is from global majority backgrounds. Interestingly, by the way, that's still below the university's overall global majority population. So it's still there is still a disparity. Over 50% of our population in the university are now global majority. But we are going to do some work with BayMed, who are a charity and a grassroots organisation. I'm a trustee for BayMed, and they are people who have navigated the system, who are working within education, and are going to do some work with the teams who are recruiting student teachers, because we need to better understand and not make assumptions as to why. The facts are that there are an overrepresentation of applicants from diverse backgrounds, yet there is an underrepresentation who actually are successful in getting onto the course. Then that line continues to fall in a negative way when we look at how many people then graduate, how many people end up in teaching jobs, how many people end up progressing, and how many people end up going into areas like being a head teacher. So there is a clear amount of work to do there. I'm really fortunate that I work and I'm affiliated to two universities who are really committed to doing some work around that. But yeah, it's a really area of interest, and a hugely important area, I would say, because if you basically take away London, really, in the main, the Midlands does quite well, but there are pockets of diversity in terms of the teacher workforce, but that's not representative of of the rest of the country.
Okay. Adam, thank you so much for sharing that. And again, particularly, my best wishes in terms of the bid and the tender, the opportunity that might come with that. Particularly, the two universities that you're connected with. I mean, your previous employer and your current employer.
Yes.
The fact that they can come together, I think that's a fantastic thing. So, if we just get your thoughts in terms of the diversity gaps, and you've sort of touched on it in terms of over-representation of applicants and under-representation of sort of successful applicants, and then the sort of the gap analysis and so forth. And again, this is a huge topic, and people look at it in different aspects of it. So just in terms of that part of it, I want to talk a little bit about that, but I also want to talk about the sort of potential glass ceiling for black leaders, if I can say that as well. I mean,
absolutely.
So if we touch to say black leaders first, I don't know whether you're comfortable with the black leadership sort of names and the campaigns that are there and the networks that are formed to support that, and you've got the women black leaders, and then you've got just general black leaders. So any thoughts in terms of this perspective? Because not everybody agrees that there should be these sort of initiatives, and we should have people getting together because of this aspect of it.
Yes.
As well.
So I am on the side of something does need to be done in terms of we do need to see more leaders from in particular black backgrounds, but again across the piece in terms of global majority backgrounds. I think you have to be intentional about that type of work. I believe meritocracy to be a myth, if I'm really honest. I think that we, all of us who are in this particular space are here because we are fortunate in one way or another, and when we fell down, or we had some people to pick us back up, etc., or our networks, and I often, again, another thing that I do when I'm talking to a group of leaders is I like to ask the question, if I've got a packed lecture theatre, say, do we all believe that we are here because we are brilliant? Because I believe the answer to that to be fundamentally not true. We're here because we've made the best of the opportunities that we had potentially. But therein lies the problem of those opportunities that we've taken. Now, this is where then, and it goes back to something I said a little bit earlier before. So in terms of leadership programs, and so number one, I think that there isn't an argument to say that we do need to see more black leaders. Let's think about my industry in terms of the sector in education, whether that's head teachers, whether it's about vice chancellors, whether it's about principals. There isn't a huge underrepresentation there. The talent is there. Let's just put that out there as well. The talent is there. There is a pipeline issue of sorts of that. I think 1% of professors are from black backgrounds. Therefore, you can start to join those dots and say, well, actually, to be a vice chancellor, there's a very good chance you need to be a professor. And so there is a pipeline issue. Same when it comes to head teachers. We just talked about this over-representation of applicants, yet under-representation on the programmes. So there's a pipeline issue. So something needs to be done about the pipeline. But there are also brilliant people who are in positions in the system now who, I've got to be honest, are fighting against some of the systemic and structural issues that exist. And I don't think we can pull our punches about that. We've got to look at that eyes wide open. I'll go into the fact that what's really pleasing about the University of Wolverhampton, and I think I will draw the links here, is so our chair of governors, Angela Spence, is herself a woman of colour, of proud Caribbean heritage. That in itself says something about leadership. When our chair of governors, and again, there won't be too many chairs of governors who look as fabulous as Angela does. And so There is something about that, the role models for there, but it's so multifaceted, this idea. So in some ways it's easier to talk about what it isn't. What I really strongly believe is that when we're talking about things like black leadership, this is not about those people needing to upskill or do an extra program or an accreditation or something or other to prepare them for the role. I don't believe that to be the case at all. What this is about is us looking at where are the barriers, the biases, the prejudices, the systems and systemic issues that stop people getting into leadership positions, because they do exist. I've been talking really candidly, and I hope I don't get told off for it, but I'm always struck by, so our Vice Chancellor, Professor Ibrahim Adia, talked about saying, so he's been appointed, he's been with us now for about 18 months, I think, something like that. But he was really honest and spoke at our inclusivity conference and said he does wonder whether would he have got the opportunity without a chair of governors like Angela, where we are actively looking to ensure that our recruitment processes are inclusive. And that said, even in a university where we do have a global majority vice chancellor, we still want to get and still recognise there are ceilings in some ways to other areas. So I absolutely believe that it's an issue. The solutions, and I think it's plural to those issues, though, lie within the institutions, organisations and structures, not with the people. But they're I could say, multifaceted, from pipeline to, yes, the barriers that are within. But what I really would push back on is that it's something that the talent needs to do to navigate these spaces. That's not my experience.
I know a lot of people talk about representation now, and they've got targets in place, targets in terms of diversity, targets for different levels, and you talk about, obviously you've talked about sort of a slightly unfair advantage because of your class background and status and various other things that gives you that a little bit of maybe competitive edge. So it's not necessarily about talent, about meritocracy, as you said. It's also about your background and where you come from in society and so forth. So talk to us a little bit about diversity, representation, and sort of people who've got targets in organisations with regard to recruitment and so forth.
Yeah, so I think you have to be really, really careful about this type of stuff. So we as a university, we have a bronze award currently for the Race Equality Charter. We hope that we will put in for we're aiming for a silver award this time. And again, I mentioned my colleague before, Sukhvinder, who has been leading on this work and doing an incredible job. And it's about being intentional, I think. So that I think I'm not sure how comfortable I am with sticking targets on something for things, because I think it ends up putting people into it can have a negative impact. And last thing that we want people saying, and these are things, unfortunately, that we know we will have heard before, people being diversity hires, etc. That's not what's being asked of. What's being asked of is that we ensure that the best people get the job. But what we need to ensure is that we don't assume that the best person looks a certain way, speaks a certain way, has a certain educational background, etc. And we need to push back and challenge on that. And so I think that, again, I come back to this in being intentional about it. So do we agree that's the case? And how do we have inclusive recruitment practices? So we worked recently, we piloted in a faculty sending interview questions out in advance, because we felt that feedback from neurodivergent members of staff, etc., talked about the fact that that was going to be beneficial and it was a more inclusive practice. I think it's more and more about how do we create inclusive practices which don't mean that we just... I'm not a huge lover of the term of unconscious bias because I think we know about them, so don't know how they can be unconscious anymore. But our biases and prejudices infiltrate everything that we do, and we're human. So when we come down to interviewing someone, we are drawn to people because we like them, etc. But I think all of us recognise that diverse teams thrive, but it's diverse teams not just in diversity of what people look like, it's diversity of thought as well. And so when people have, we talked about, you've just talked about people's class, and if we think about even the indices of multiple deprivation, so IMD quintiles, and 1 and 2 being the quintiles from areas of lower social deprivation, and IMD 5 being people from more affluent backgrounds. But actually, for our institutions, businesses, organisations to succeed, we want people to represent all that spectrum. That's really important to be able to, because we don't know what we don't know. We go to those stages of being consciously incompetent, and unconsciously incompetent because we don't know about those things. So I think this is it's less about, for me, having numbers of people because it's really good to have some diversity up there because it looks good. I think this is about it brings different lived experiences. Since working and being privileged to work in an area like EDI and spending more time with colleagues who have a disability or are passionate about that area, I've learned so much about that, and that's made us really think about how we become more inclusive in that type of way, which generally just makes things better. Again, we've got a really long way to go on all of this type of work. But the diversity of thought and diversity of lived experience, I would argue, has to be a good thing. But I come back to what we are trying to do is always get the best candidate for any particular role. But we need to understand that for too often we've been convinced that a best candidate looks and speaks and is educated in a certain way or from a certain place. I think we have to challenge that, and I think it is about being intentional about challenging that.
Okay. Adam, if you go back to the education institutions, you've worked in higher education for more than 5 years now, nearly coming on to 6 years. You've worked in the sort of secondary education and sort of primary education before. And if you talk about sort of curriculum or curricula, has that changed? You've got 2 decades experience within the whole education sector. I know education, you've got different aspects of it, but has the curriculum developed as a reflect of the multiculturalism that's there and the change that's happening in not just in UK but the world?
So yes would be the simple answer. So I think if we start out maybe in compulsory education first, if we think about the sort of early years primary and secondary education, I joined moved into that sector at a time where, particularly in primary education, we did have quite a lot of freedom of adapting our curricula to the needs of the children and young people. The school that I worked in for the longest period of time was in a really, I was about to say challenging area. It wasn't at all. It was in an absolutely glorious area. I love, but technically, in terms of awards and the data, it was a challenging area in terms of social deprivation. So we adapted our curricula because we therefore knew our children and young people and families had lots about them. We didn't come from a deficit model. That was first and foremost. So these children, young families and people had lots of skills to be able to build upon. So we had a curriculum that we wanted to build upon those skills and lived experiences. But we also knew that there were some areas that were not strong and that were lacking. So for lots of our young children and young people in that particular school, it was things around cultural capital, it was stuff about enrichment. And so we devised a curricula that was really, really focused on that and providing those opportunities. Unfortunately, in my time in education, what I would say was that over a sustained period of time, that freedom to adapt curricula to meet the needs of the children and young people, I felt my own perception, it's only an opinion, it's important to say that, but I felt that curriculum was being narrowed as the narrative and the push from central government came more and more to focus on very, very knowledge rich. So knowledge rich curriculum, you must know these particular things. And I'm not saying I'm opposed to knowledge, that would be ridiculous at all. But there was a narrowing of curricula, and that I felt was a retro step. I thought that was a step backwards. We eventually sort of moved to, and as I left education, where teachers were having to do, or compulsory education, were having to do more and more to try and bend what was quite a rigid curricula and an overpacked curricula to meet the needs of their children and young people. And that didn't sit with me too comfortably. What I would say that I really enjoyed the transition into higher education is that almost seeing that from the other side. So I think there was traditionally in higher education, I think even the idea of a curriculum, our academics are called lecturers, and the idea of what a lecturer is, and what even a lecturer, someone stood there and them giving knowledge to the students in front of them, that is being more and more disrupted, particularly in universities like ours. I mentioned before I arrived at the University of Wolverhampton, where there was an inclusive curriculum framework. I have to say I thought that was absolutely brilliant. The principles that it had in there were 4 overarching principles. Where am I in the curriculum? Are we removing obstacles, developing our inclusive lens, and are our students co-creators? And then that was really a really strong framework. As I say, we've now we've now moved on from that. So those principles being embedded now into a wider curriculum framework, but very much so a change, I would say, in higher education from this idea of didactic teaching. So I have the knowledge and I'm going to teach to you, and instead being more of a facilitator of learning. What do our students really need? What are the students saying that they want? And they're really loud and clear in talking about, we want employability skills. Really links to apprenticeships and the work that's happening there. What are the skills that I need in employment? I want time in employment. I want placements. And so I found that in higher education, we are becoming more adaptive in our curriculum and our curricular offer. And yeah, I'm really enjoying that space. That's a big piece of work that's ongoing at the moment, this curriculum review. Helen Aldridge, a colleague, doing some great work, and Kate Faulkner reading some great work there. Jill Knight, our Pro Vice Chancellor, really driving that forward. And it's almost like a full circle. So in compulsory education, my perception was we had a narrowing of curricula, and in higher education, where I think traditionally there was quite a narrow curriculum as such, it's not that we are now seeing that the expectation of our academics is to be more facilitators of learning rather than this didactic approach to teaching.
Okay. I don't know, we've sort of touched on it, but you are much more than your job title or your position that you've got. You're involved in many, sort of, you're at the forefront of many initiatives. You're a driver of change. You're involved with different sort of aspects of it, and you sort of live and breathe the subject matter, and it's part of who you are, your identity, and so forth. You touched on the fact that you're a trustee of BAME Ed.
Yeah.
You've got many other initiatives. You're very active, a campaigner. You're active on social media and so forth. So talk to us a little bit about the extracurricular activities outside the sort of role, and just trying to bring it together in terms of some of the things that you've been involved with and lead on.
Yeah, so I suppose the ultimately what brings it all together, the umbrella is education. I've come to realise and accept that I absolutely love education and really believe in it. Do I think that the system and sector is fundamentally flawed? Yes. I don't even know if I believe whether the system is failing or it's doing as it sets out to do, even at times. However, I really believe in education. I believe in the sector. I believe there are good people that are within the sector. I know it sounds at conflict with each other.
Yeah.
And so the sort of the extracurricular stuff that I'm involved in is all linked together with that. So whether it's working with Square Peg, who are again a grassroots organisation working with children, parents, young families, and the schools as well for children and young people who are struggling to access schools, and working around attendance and issues around that. Whether it's around BAMED and the work that's going on there, my interest, or whether it's our diverse podcast and those things, I am just really, really interested in ensuring that education does what it can do. It fulfills its potential. So education, when done, I suppose maybe as someone who's had, and I've spoken about this, had an amazing primary school experience, and it was a horrific secondary school experience. I know both sides of that coin, and I'm really committed to ensuring that we get it right for more times than we get it wrong for people. And so the things that I tend to do and choose to do in my own time all link back into that. And again, there are so many brilliant people who are committed to this work. Ellie Costello at Square Pegs, and Amjad and Alana, and all the brilliant trustees, and Penny, the founders of BAMED, and Hannah Wilson at Diverse Ed, and Benny Carr. There are brilliant people doing work here. And I think this comes back to, we mentioned about JAG and the work that's going on with the Multicultural Alliance, and it's just brilliant work, and it excites me, and I suppose that's when it comes to the extracurricular stuff and the things that are beyond the role, I'm just really excited about it, because I think it gives us a chance to. Education probably needs a revolution, not evolution, but I'm not sure. Just saying that out loud, it's just a soundbite, isn't it? It's a word salad. What does it actually mean? So I think evolution is probably what we've got, and all the things that I'm involved with are part of what we hope is that evolution of the education sector.
Okay, Adam. I mean, I touched it right at the beginning, the fact that you're an individual that we've spoken about. You are well connected. You've name dropped so many different people, and I hope you haven't missed anybody out. So but you've named dropped so many people. It's all about teamwork. It's all about collaboration. You touched on it right at the beginning. Your work with NHS and various other things. So talk to us a little bit about how you as an individual are sort of getting together with others and forming these collaborations and these partnerships, and how you make it work.
Yeah, so I absolutely think that the collaboration and teamwork is the only way forward. So whatever area of work that we're looking at, I am only one very, very small, tiny component of that. I suppose that I've come to recognise that one of the things, I had some coaching myself recently, and the person, Gary, who was coaching me, was saying, you need to unpick your superpowers. Basically, if you can't if you can't articulate the things that you're good at, then how do you expect other people to? So I'm confident enough now to say that one of the things that I know that I do quite well is bringing people together. Whether it's networking or whether it's building teams. But I think all of this work that we are doing, it's all going to be achieved when we are better as a we than a me. And I think it's about talking, and it's also about us not existing in echo chambers. Yeah. So we have to learn how to disagree agreeably. We realise that it's great sitting in a room with like-minded people talking about things that we're all committed to. But ultimately, that's not going to shift the dial, really. The job is us talking to people who have a different viewpoints on things to us. And yes, I suppose everyone's always trying to convince the other, but it's about having those dialogues and conversations, taking action to move things forward. And I absolutely think that comes as a team. And one of the great things about my role is that I get to work across lots of different teams. I got to meet yourself and Jag and the great team of people here through the works that was happening with the apprenticeships back at the University of Wolverhampton. Jenny Cannon, Sean, Christian, and the Apprenticeship Hub, and everyone doing brilliant work. And being really interested and committed to that, and then recognising that, that we've got some work to do with apprenticeships around that diversifying our apprenticeship offer. We want to do that, linking in more with the brilliant work that you guys are doing as well, and that Jag's doing. I think, getting out and speaking to people is absolutely key. The only thing that I would say is that we don't want it just to be a talking shop. So it's great having these conversations, but it's about, okay, so what then? What are the tangible actions that come from that? But yes, I really value teamwork, and I think it's essential for us to. I think we do have common goals. Most of us have common goals, and so how we achieve those common goals, there can be a difference of opinion how we get to that. But having a common goal is a good starting point.
I want to talk a little about leadership. What leadership means to you? You are a leader. You're a leader that I recognise, and many others in our community recognise. Whether it's the higher education community, whether it's education as a whole, whether it's the DEI space. And so you are a very influential thought leader. You're definitely a change maker. So talk to me about adapting leadership in your journey.
Thank you for those really kind words as well. But I think leadership, and so obviously it comes down to the cultures that we create and are part of. And I was really, really fortunate in that my sort of unofficial mentors in terms of leadership. So my head teacher for a long time, Phil Stewart, taught me a lot that I hold dear to this day. So Phil was the head teacher of the school I was in for a really long time, and he embodied all the things that I think a leader should be. So he was authentic. He showed great humility. He cared. He never lost the fact that he would walk to school every day. He was on the gate every day, talking to the parents. And as a leader, I think that's essential. And it's something that I absolutely take into leadership with me. So my colleagues and friends at the university will laugh. So when I'm on city campus, although I do have an office, I spend the vast majority of my time sat in Costa Coffee, not because I love drinking coffee. It's handy, but the fact that when I'm there, I have the most. I get to see our student body walking around, and you hear the bits of conversations that people are having. Staff and students will come up to you and speak to you. You're visible, and I think being a leader, it's really key to be visible. There is a lot of work that needs to be done, and if you wanted to, you could lock yourself in an office all day and be getting on with that work. But I think being visible is hugely important, because that's how you become approachable. And I think often, I don't think this is limited to higher education. I think in most places, in most areas, we've got an intent and implementation gap. So read any university's strategy, the intent is always excellent. It's always really good. I'd struggle anyone to find a school or college, university that you don't read the mission or the values and think, I sign up to that. Go and speak to the students and staff in all of those places, and is that the reality? So, and in some places, yes, and in some places, no. So the intent and implementation gap, And as leaders, the only way that we know that is by being on the ground as well. So I think that leadership is about a fine balance between strategic and operational. I think that every member of staff should know who you are. I learned really, really quickly, school's a really great grounding place. So in school, you know straight away that the people who are most integral to a school are the caretaker, the auxiliary staff, the lunchtime supervisors, the people who come in and help the children to read. They are your eyes and ears for the community and everything else. And of course, teachers and the senior leaders are important too, and the governors, etc. And I think leadership is about that, making sure that you are completely approachable, that you actually listen, and you try to do something about that. But maybe it's I don't know, maybe it's that I don't quite have the pressure yet that I have to be locked in a room all the time. But I'd like to think that they are the sort of the principles that I would always live by. And so, yeah, I think leadership is about relationships, authenticity, and action. You know, people will judge you on what you've done, and what did you achieve. And again, a bit like saying the constant journey and evolution in ourselves, we're constantly evolving as leaders as well, and as institutions and organisations.
Yeah. Adam, you touched on it right at the beginning, where you said, you know, you're fairly much frontline. You know, you work, you're there talking to the students, the people that matter, and so forth. And you spend most of your time, wherever possible, at the sort of frontline chalk face and so forth. I think that's a big part of it as well. In terms of understanding the difference and, you know, understanding what's going on. So I think that's another thing aspect of it. But as you said, it's all about the execution of it, really. You know, we've all got, hopefully we're all here for the right reasons. We're all here with the right intention. But it's about, ultimately it's about the outcome, the impact or the execution, and hopefully the difference we make, the outcome that we make.
Absolutely. And I think that really speaks to in most places that I've worked in, again, University of Wolverhampton, no exception at all, but often the answers to some of the more or challenging problems, etc., are right under our nose. And our job as leaders is to facilitate and create that space where those people have the opportunity to be able to do that. I'll give you an example. So we've got a growing body of international students, and we recognise when international students arrive in the country, there are different challenges. If you're new to a country, maybe new to the language even, then there's a set of challenges. And there was a brilliant initiative in our Faculty of Science and Engineering called Global Gathering, where they did lots of things to make students really settle in. So you look at that and go, well, why do we just have that in one faculty? So this is a colleague, Kate Faulkner and Paul Hampton, who developed this. And my job was simply then just to give them the opportunity to be able to deliver that across the university. Not my idea. All we're doing is facilitating what was a brilliant idea. Looking at that, that's great. We should have it broader than that. And I think a lot of the time in leadership, it's about empowering others. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, there's a saying, isn't it? Sometimes, you know, ideas are quite easy. It's not the ideas. It's about you actually, you know, getting it work and making it work for everybody. Couple of things, because we've had a fantastic conversation. I'm going to try and bring it to a little bit of a close. And as I said, you know, I really appreciate you opening up and sharing with myself and obviously our listeners some of the insightful experiences and knowledge. You know, you've mentioned teamwork. You've mentioned sort of peers. You've mentioned all the people that have made an impact to yourself. If this was a Christmas dinner or we were having a chat, what are the conversations that your peers, people who are possibly role models to you, people that either are mentors to you or people that, you know, again, likewise reverse mentoring, or people that, you know, look up to you yourself? What would be the conversations on the table at the moment? What are the things, the teams, the topics?
So I think and we've touched on some of them. I think when it comes to education at any level. So with higher education, we're always looking at closing awarding gaps and closing those gaps with groups of students. But even if I think about, I'm talking to my friends and colleagues in education, it's still those issues around social mobility, about closing gaps between disadvantaged children and pupils. That remains the biggest challenge, really. And I think that speaks to the other issue, which again we've spoken about as being the aim is to have more representation, and so the conversations we're having about, like you say, leadership positions, etc., and getting to that point. But interestingly, one of the other conversations, we'll go back to what I said at the outset, is that eventually DEI as a thing should just be embedded into everything, and that should be, it shouldn't need someone to direct that as a separate area. But we are a long way from that situation. I don't mean we're a long way in our university, we're just a long way across society about that. I think one of the other conversations is, obviously we are in a quite polarized time in terms of DEI. So the sort of the culture wars, or the war on woke, if people want to use it as that type of headline type of terminology. And so that means we find ourselves in quite dichotomized positions of either you think one way or the other way. And of course, I think our job, for those of us working within the D&I environment, is to acknowledge that it's a lot more grey than that, and that, again, coming back to some common goals, lots of us tend to have a common goal. We just need to think about how we share that. So they would be the things, I think, that are in my networks that we're talking about quite a lot at the moment.
Okay. Adam, you've been with the university, say, 2.5 years. You talked about some of the programs and some of the initiatives and some of the partnership working. What does the future look like for your good self in terms of your role, and then generally in terms of the university and its ambitions looking forward?
Yeah, so let's start with the university. So the university has a growth agenda. We recognise that, going back to those things that we're doing really well in terms of social mobility, in terms of graduate outcomes, etc., that we can be not just a leader within the region, but we can be a first choice destination nationally, internationally, and we really want to push that. So the Vice Chancellor, the Vice Chancellor's group are really, really committed to this growth agenda, and it's an exciting time, not without its challenge, because the sector is shrinking. So trying to grow in a sector that's shrinking is a challenge, but one that we are up for. In terms of myself, I'm in a really fortunate position in that the team that I work with, I mentioned before, my colleagues Adam and Sukhvinder, we have a lot of work on our plates, and it's good work that we can get stuck into, as I mentioned before, access and participation plans, about closing gaps, etc. So there's a lot to do, and I think that what's next for me really is that I think I need to be held to account to next time that I'm having a chat with you, that we've closed the awarding gap, that's beginning to close because of the things that we've been intentional about. So I'll have to mention apprenticeships, in terms of, we want to, our apprenticeship provision is not as diverse as the rest of our university. And there are lots of different reasons for that, and we haven't got time to unpick those things now, but we have been actively working with our partners and bringing in people like yourselves and hosting conferences, etc., to try and move that dial. And we are doing that. We are increasingly moving that dial, so our apprenticeships are becoming more diverse. And so I think that for me next, it's about it's about us seeing the large scale impact. So far in my 2.5 years, there are real success stories and things that I can pin on and say, this is great. In this particular program or this area, we did this and we had this impact. We've got an area in the Masters of Nursing where we closed the awarding gap from a 50% gap to no gap. So we've got some really tangible things. But next time I was having a chat with you, I'd want to be able to say that across a university we were seeing more of those gaps closed. And I think that it needs to now be the not the exception of pockets of places, but actually this is what we're really achieving. So I hope that the university will have grown. And with that growth, I hope that we will have continued to close and narrow the gaps, but continue to widen access and participation. So yeah,
Adam, that's the first for us here at the Candid Conversations podcast. Where it's on record now. We can hold you to account, and I'll come back and replay this and say, Adam, you said this on this particular day. Yeah. How you going? We're going to definitely.
I'll bring my vice chancellor with me as well, so he can also say the same thing because he will.
we can definitely pin you down. So I really appreciate that. Honestly, it's been a fabulous conversation. And again, really hats off to you for sharing and being so open and so honest and very inspiring, if I can say, and I'm praising you, and I know you're not too comfortable with the praise because you've already cut me off a couple of times to say, well, yeah, you know what, not really, but genuinely, I think you're absolutely truly inspiring. It's a privilege to have listened to you, privilege to read some of your fantastic stuff, and I think, as I said, you are fairly active. You are active in a number of ways. You're much more than the role that you're currently doing. I'm not saying it's a small role; it's a massive role, but it's much more than that. You're making a big impact on the landscape in terms of the educational landscape and the landscape in terms of the DEI initiatives, and all together it's about impact. So I want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts to firstly coming on this podcast, but also the support. The allyship, it's not just a word for yourself, and I know it's genuine, and the positivity that you've shared. So from my perspective, thank you so much appreciated. I'll ask you for any last words and some encouragement, hopefully.
Yeah, no, honestly, it's been an absolute pleasure to have a chat with you. Thank you, and thanks for making it so comfortable to be able to waffle on, and thank you for the opportunity. Thanks for the partnerships as well. I think the university are really, really grateful for the work that we're doing together, and thank you for the opportunity to come and have a chat, and I look forward to you holding me to account next time.
Adam, thank you so much appreciated, sir.
Thank you very much.